After so many videos discussing the Omnitrix itself, and others talking about the many alien transformations in Ben 10, it feels only a natural fit to get around to talking about the selected few aliens that managed to escape the Omnitrix and make their way into the world as their own fully realised beings. Whether they be people of their own, villain or otherwise, who were mistakenly trapped in the device when their DNA sample was taken on accident, the mindless however many alien transformations that escaped the Omnitrix and went running about the place in Bellwood, or the group that due to an error in the Ultimatrix were given sentience and physical forms within this kind of pocket dimension in the device, who then tried to kill Ben in an attempt to set themselves free, or a couple of outlier aliens that we'll get into towards the end of the video. What I'm getting at is there's quite a lot of aliens who, at some stage, left the Omnitrix in some way, shape or form. So we'll cover each grouping individually, then talk about the three outliers towards the end of the video. Starting out with those mindless transformations I mentioned. If you haven't gone back and watched Alien Force in a while, I can imagine this bunch might not come to mind right away, being the two-parter Vengeance of Vilgax, in an attempt to prepare himself for a now supercharged Vilgax, following however many power-ups, new abilities and weapons tailored to Ben's alien roster, Ben and Kevin get the idea to hack into the Omnitrix to unlock Master Control forcibly. Following the Omnitrix swapping between its recalibrated appearance and the classic design, Azimuth pops up telling the two not to do that. Kevin now not all too sure on this, but Ben decides to power through and overloads the Omnitrix, creating this explosion of various kinds of energy, mutating Kevin, wrecking the area, but more importantly to today's topic, out of the rubble comes out chromastone and then Spider Monkey, followed by the reveal that neither of them is Ben, and finally, Goop slithers off. And then we get the reveal that 4 of Ben's 10 transformations are missing, most surprisingly of which is Waybig, who's gone walkabouts, somehow without anybody noticing. Really loving the visual of the Omnitrix here. Azimuth chiming back in, letting us know that the escaped Geno archetypes or transformations will die if they're not put back in the Omnitrix within 24 hours, and we have the fetch quest of Ben going after each individually, having to use the DNA acquisition sequence to get them back in there. On that, a bit strange, but Ben gives Gwen a puzzled look here, her letting him know that that's the yellow setting. Luckily for our main trio, the transformations can be tracked using their plumber's badges, thanks to each transformation having their own Omnitrix dial. A bit of a side note, but there's some really great character moments here following Kevin's mutation. But back to the topic at hand. Chromastone is mindlessly flailing about, hitting a fair ride. All the escaped aliens are practically mindless, only going off of base instinct. We get a great little fight sequence between Chromastone and Kevin. Kevin using this as a much needed opportunity to take out some frustration and test out his new body. Ben joining in before Kevin whacks Chromastone over the back of the head, leaving him for Ben to reabsorb. Shortly after, they come to blows with Spider Monkey, who's particularly leaning into that spider part, creating this enormous webbing and trapping Gwen. Kevin worrying that since he's going purely off of base instinct, that he'll lay eggs in Gwen's head, citing what happened when Big Chill took over Ben and had kids. Ben having a reasonably easy time recapturing this one, following some annoyance with webbing. The contrast between Brainstorm's intelligence and the snarling spider monkey is quite nice, and despite that intelligence, Gwen's having to point out to Ben he doesn't have to fight him and can just recapture him. Oh right, all of this is in build up to Vilgax returning, so there's a bit of a time crunch here. But before that, down in the store, Ben finds Goop's gravity projector and is in a pretty horrific way captured by Goop, leaving him nearly immobilized and assumably without air. A tussle between Goop and Swampfire ends with the two of them on the surface, and this nearly brainless Goop somehow managing to use the projector in a very creative way to rip Swampfire apart before getting recaptured. Unfortunately for Ben, they didn't get a chance to get Waybig before the big confrontation with Vilgax, and right when things look at their absolute worst with Ben being literally under Vilgax's foot, Gwen and Kevin lure a particularly peaceful Waybig for Ben to absorb. And that's it really. Not a huge payoff with Waybig. He doesn't really factor into that fight all too much other than giving Ben a bit of a breather. But Chromastone's recapture does lead to the return of Diamond Head, and that results in Ben absolutely mopping the floor with Vilgax, so there is that. Overall, a fun concept having these aliens running about operating off of sheer instinct and not much else, especially with how different they are to one another, even just on base instinct, particularly with Waybig and how peaceful he is. I don't feel particularly crazy on the fact that they have a 24-hour expiration date. It feels a bit arbitrary, but it serves the narrative, so it's fine. Getting into some more fully realised transformations, we've got these sentient ultimates. Following this swap out from Omnitrix to Ultimatrix in a fight with a typical UAF-era red and silver robot, while using Ultimate Humongosaur, Ben starts lashing out, telling Gwen and Kevin he's not Ben, attacking the pair of them before a bit of a power struggle between the now sentient Ultimate Humongosaur and Ben. Following this, and back in his human form, the struggle for who's in control continues on before Ben's body disappears into the Ultimatrix. Gwen sending a projected anodite version of herself in after him. Inside, Ben's greeted by the particularly upset, now sentient Ultimate Echo, Spider Monkey, Swampfire, Cannonbolt, and Big Chill, being all the forms bar Ultimate Humungosaur, who he's used up until this point. So I suppose the reasonable thinking here is that each time Ben's used the Ultimate feature on a new transformation, that simulation that evolves them into their ultimate forms also creates a sentient being in the Ultimatrix. So I suppose it's kind of a blessing Ben didn't use too many various forms, otherwise this place would have been pretty crowded. On that, these formers want to kill Ben since they've convinced themselves killing him would set them free from being trapped in the device. Ben tries to reason with them a bit, but they're not all too keen on hearing Ben out, calling him a liar and lashing out at him. Ultimate Big Chill and Swampfire really clearly letting us know that they're living, breathing beings who just want to be free of the device no matter what it takes. Ultimate Spider Monkey and Humungosaur then webbing him up and dragging him over to this very conveniently placed fire pit to sacrifice him. Then following Ultimate Humungosaur earlier taking over Ben transforms into Ghostfreak trying to possess Ultimate Humungosaur, but this doesn't work out. There's a scuffle where Ben holds his own surprisingly well, seeing as just how tough each of these transformations are individually, even if they do eventually get the best of him. Gwen pops by and Ben is way big fend them off for a bit, but they do get overwhelmed again later. Then Gwen decides she's going to use the full extent of her anodite abilities, sacrificing her humanity fully to wipe out all the Ultimates at once if it means saving Ben. Ben pleads with her to stand down and goes on to choose to sacrifice himself so that the Ultimates could be free. Ben lets them know he never intended for any of them to suffer, quite clearly being unaware they were in there in the first place, jumping into the fire pit only to be shown waking up outside of the device with all the Ultimates as well as Azimuth around him. I failed to mention this earlier, but this whole time Kevin's been off-world trying to get Azimuth to come lend a hand. Back to it, some nice open communication here. Azimuth explains to us that their consciousness was a result of a glitch that he's now fixed. Ultimate Humungosaur, who I suppose is the de facto leader of the group, apologising to Ben before they all head through a portal with Azimuth. They're said to all head to a planet together to live in peace, but for whatever reason I was convinced that they all went to live on their own species homeworld and just get amongst their own people, but I'm not all too sure where that comes from. Anyway, I just loved this group of aliens and episode, and it's just a real great highlight of the series for me. It's such a shame they never made a return in any way, shape or form. Now, let's get into those outliers I mentioned earlier. Starting off with one that probably slips people's minds as an escaped Omnitrix transformation, we've got Chromastone. In The Secrets of Chromastone, our titular transformation makes his second sentient escape from the Omnitrix. In the reverse of when he was shattered in that Vilgax fight to reveal Diamond Head, Tetrax makes a return, shattering a still conscious Ben as Diamond Head to reveal the sentient member of the species, Sugalite, the former guardian of Petropia, Diamond Head and Tetrax's homeworld, which had since been blown up, making Tetrax presumably the last living member of the species. From that, Tetrax gives him this backup of the planet stored in a crystal. There's some interruptions from Vilgax who nearly kills Sugalite. Ben as Diamond Head then climbs up this mountain, holding up the crystal and resurrects all the Petrosapiens. From that, Sugalite, in an exception to the rule of escaped Omnitrix transformations, just happily goes on to live his life there, while Ben still keeps Chromastone as a transformation. Sugalite sort of being the happy ending timeline version of the next character on this list, who I'm sure most likely would be the first one to come to mind when talking about escaped aliens, Ghostfreak, who I've covered time and time again, so we'll keep this one reasonably brief. And something you might not have known, zs'skayr was incidentally absorbed into the Omnitrix when they were scanning the DNA donor for wildvine species, due to the alien they scanned being possessed by zs'skayr at the time. And the rule with his species, as I'm sure you're aware of if you're familiar with the series, is that their consciousness exists within every strand of their DNA. So with his DNA being put into the Omnitrix, so is zs'skayr, at least pre-Omniverse, where there's no longer an issue with that with the completed Omnitrix. The curious bit here, and I don't know where I land on this, so I'd be curious for your opinion, does that mean that the original zs'skayr is entirely in there, basically meaning the rest of him went into the Omnitrix, or when scanned and replicated in the Omnitrix, did that then create an entirely new version of zs'skayr, or is it somewhere in between? Basically what I'm asking is, are there multiple zs'skyrs out there, at least prior to Ben taking him out however many times? Anyway, following slowly regaining consciousness, Ghostfreak starts appearing in Ben's dreams before, a bit like Ultimate Humungosaur, taking over Ben, brutalizing the circus freak trio before finally confronting Ben, ripping off his outer layer of skin, revealing his true horrifying form. This eventuating in Ben exposing him to sunlight before he's eventually resurrected. But before he is, and revealed out of series, apparently prior to that, when Ben transformed into Ghostfreak off screen in the past, zs'skayr went off and contacted Dr. Victor, the mummy and the werewolf, to start their plans to take over Earth, which luckily he did, otherwise you'd assume he'd be gone for good, had Victor not brought him back to life. And finally, a bit of an outlier amongst outliers, we've got Feedback, who rather than escaping and going on to do anything, he didn't make it all too far from the device before getting erased. Pretty quick one to wrap things up, following Ben's over-reliance on the transformation, following the classic series in a confrontation with Malware, where Malware, doing his absolute best to really hurt Ben, forcibly removed Feedback from the Omnitrix, disintegrating him in front of an at the time 11-year-old Ben, who'd hold on to the trauma of that for 5+ years, before finally working through it in his final confrontation with Malware later on in Omniverse. Overall, it's surprising how often people or mindless transformations make their way in and out of the Omnitrix, but it always tends to be a real highlight for me. I'd be curious how you rank each of these groupings individually. If you've made it this far into the video and aren't subscribed, please consider doing so. Either way, I appreciate you being here. Thanks for watching.